This is Inside Politics with Judy Woodruff in Washington.
Thanks for joining us. Bernard Shaw is on assignment. Bob Inman was expected to be key to a retooling of President Clinton's national security team. But now Inman is the source of a surprise political glitch for the White House. The retired admiral stepped aside today as the president's nominee to become Secretary of Defense. He said his problem was not with Mr. Clinton, but with the Senate's top Republican, with a prominent columnist, and among other things, with what Inman calls modern McCarthyism. But Inman's explanation raised more questions than it answered. And in a moment, we will turn to CNN's White House correspondent, Wolf Blitzer. But now, one major point Bob Inman made in withdrawing his name from consideration as Defense Secretary was his reluctance to endure personal and partisan attacks. And in an interview that I conducted earlier this afternoon with him, he reiterated his view that the current political climate in Washington was making it increasingly difficult for anyone to be a public servant.
All the allegations about whether or not there was likely to be partisan opposition was to really get me to focus on the climate of doing public service. And if I had been hungry for the job and I've been desperate to want to have the title, you ignore all of that. But as I indicated in my letter, I've already done 30 years of public service. I don't think I have to make any apologies about deciding that I don't want to do more of it, particularly in a climate that was heavily influenced by watching last week Whitewater development stories. And, you know, is this the way we govern the country? And if that was what I could anticipate, not personally related to me, but as a general climate toward government for the next 3 years, I decided I didn't want to be a part of it. I say again, I believe that Whitewater, issues like it, are very legitimate campaign issues. In '92, again in '96. But I don't see what they have to do with governing the country in '94. And I would tell you, I believe that's the view held by the bulk of the population out across the country.
We'll be back in a moment with more on the Inman surprise. We'll talk to CNN White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer and others for reaction. We'll be back.
Inside Politics is brought to you by Paul Mitchell Salon Hair Care for fit, vibrant hair.
Hair that is free-flowing, like the sea, living in harmony with light, dancing in its shadows. Fit, vibrant hair, nourished and cared for by the elements of our earth. This is Paul Mitchell hair.
Remember, buy the real Paul Mitchell products in salons only.
There is only one Florida, but there are so many ways to see it. Of course, you can't see it if you're not here. Call for a free vacation guide.
It was 1955 when H&R Block began preparing America's taxes. And throughout the decades, we've always stood behind our work, even went with you to an audit, no charge. Our prices have always been reasonable, and we've continued to grow with more experienced tax preparers than anyone. It all holds true today. The times and tax laws have changed, but one thing hasn't changed. You can still trust H&R Block.
What do you want out of life in the 90s? A healthier lifestyle?
A great wardrobe.
A chance to see the world.
And the best in entertainment.
The 90s are changing.
And so are we.
The new Living in the 90s, weekdays, 11 Eastern on CNN.
I was seeing my parents off, and I realized...
Dad, what do you got in here? Gardening equipment?
They've planned their retirement for a long time.
Common sense says the time to plan for your future is today.
One day, it's going to be our turn.
And Fidelity Investments, America's largest mutual fund company, can help you begin.
Debbie?
One day, Jeff sat down to figure out how much we'll have for retirement.
How's it going, Professor?
Very funny. Take a look at
I thought we were doing a pretty good job. At this rate, we'll never retire.
Over 2 million Americans trust their retirement savings to Fidelity, with choices like Fidelity Asset Manager, a fund that gradually adjusts its portfolio to let you take advantage of changing market conditions with no sales charge. So call Fidelity now for this free booklet, a common sense guide to planning for retirement. You'll also receive everything you need to start. Call 1-800-372-5959. Fidelity Investments. Common sense. Uncommon results.
Okay, so I tend to put things off. For me, the time just has to be right. Like, I meet this amazing girl, and she's coming over tonight. It's like with Rogaine. I've been meaning to check it out. This is important to me. I thought about calling lots of times. You know when I called? Today. This was my time.
It could be your time, too. To find out more about Rogaine with minoxidil, call this 800 number now. You'll get a free information kit filled with facts to help answer your questions about Rogaine. And since you need a prescription to get Rogaine, you'll also get a list of local doctors offering a free private consultation to help you decide if Rogaine is right for you. So call today.
Hi.
Hi. Nice place.
Call now, 1-800-607-0111 for a free information kit.
Well, as we've been reporting, the political surprise of this day in Washington has been the announcement by retired Admiral Bob Inman that he no longer wishes to be considered as President Clinton's nominee for Secretary of Defense. We want to go now to CNN's White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer for more reaction from that place, the place where his name first came up. Wolf, what are you hearing from the people you're talking to there?
Well, there's no doubt, Judy, that all of this came as a bombshell to most White House officials, although there were some indications earlier that Admiral Inman was considering withdrawing his name. There already is a search underway for a new defense secretary. Indeed, White House officials say the president will very carefully consider a lot of names. Two safe names are the current Deputy Defense Secretary, William Perry, and the CIA Director, James Woolsey. Both of those names are seriously being considered, but at this point, a lot of other names will be considered as well. The White House will be very, very careful to make sure the next name it sends up to Capitol Hill will be a name that has been thoroughly vetted. All in all, this was supposed to be a very slow news day at the White House today, but it's turned out to be anything but that. While President Clinton was having his annual physical checkup at Bethesda Naval Hospital outside Washington, Bobby Inman was withdrawing his nomination as the next defense secretary.
This was not a decision I reached easily, but it's one I have thought through and I'm comfortable with.
Inman, whose confirmation hearings were set to begin next week, cited what he called a new McCarthyism, specifically blaming New York Times columnist William Safire for having criticized his earlier record.
There were reports, which both will probably deny, that there was a trade between Mr. Safire and Senator Dole. That if Senator Dole would turn up the heat on my nomination, that Safire would turn up the heat on Whitewater development.
In a December 23rd column, Safire wrote that as an executive, Inman's a flop, as a judge of character, he is a naif, as a taxpayer, he is a cheat, and in short, he was Mr. Clinton's worst cabinet nomination. Inman told CNN that he simply did not want to put up with the personal attacks.
I had indicated much earlier that I did not seek a return to public service, and I perhaps mentally wasn't prepared for the viciousness of some of the attacks.
In an exchange of letters with the president, Inman wrote that the precipitating event for my decision was news first received on December 30th that Senator Dole had directed a partisan response to my nomination.
I was really stunned by his explanations and some of the allegations that he said he had heard and chose to believe without apparently checking them out.
The president, in accepting Inman's decision, wrote, "While I understand the personal considerations that have led you to this decision, I am nevertheless saddened that our nation will be denied your service." Upon returning to the White House from the hospital, Meanwhile, there has been some some public reaction from Senator Dole, insisting that all of the accusations that Admiral Inman was making were simply absurd. Let's listen to Senator Dole.
Zoe Baer didn't make it. Kimba Wood didn't make it because of the same problem. And what I was mostly concerned about, I wanted him to be an independent voice for strong defense in America. And I conveyed that to one of his best friends who passed it on to Inman several weeks ago, that I wasn't leading any opposition to him. So I think it's probably a pretty weak excuse for maybe not wanting the job in the first place.
Senator, Mr. Inman held a news conference a short time ago and said that there was a quid pro quo between you and William Safire, that if you would turn up the heat on, he wanted you to turn up the heat on Inman. Oh, you would turn up the heat on Clinton and Whitewater, and he would turn up the heat on Inman.
Well, he's probably not qualified to be Secretary of Defense if he has fantasies like that. I mean, I don't work with the newspapers. So, but, he has the right to say anything he wants. I think the problem is if I didn't want the job, or maybe some other problem we don't know about, you never know when somebody withdraws.
So you deny there was any sort of relationship?
Yeah, I don't have a habit of working out deals with the New York Times. But
Would you have voted for him?
I had made up my mind. We were going to ask some questions. I'd said publicly, I don't know if I'm going to vote for him or not, but I was not leading any effort. Something strange about that letter. I don't know what it is, but it's not the real reason he quit.
President Clinton is now back here at the White House after his checkup at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He has not yet spoken publicly about these latest developments, though he could. Judy?
Wolf, is the White House citing to you any other reason that may have been behind this that hasn't been publicly offered?
Well, White House officials, at least those with whom I have spoken, were as stunned by this as I was and most of the news media. They watched the news conference that Admiral Inman had in Austin, Texas, and they frankly think it was sort of bizarre that someone with his stature, with his reputation, his experience in Washington would have been so unnerved by personal attacks by a newspaper columnist, for the most part, William Safire, against him. They just think it was strange. And then one official pointed out that if Bill Clinton had been as sensitive to those kinds of criticisms during his political career, he would have been gone a long time ago. It was just something out of the blue, very strange, and there are no real hard answers here, and they're just letting Admiral Inman's words speak for themselves.
All right, Wolf Blitzer at the White House. Thanks. Well, joining us now for a further discussion of the Inman withdrawal and its potential political impact on President Clinton are Democratic Senator Charles Robb of Virginia, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and former Defense Secretary Dick Cheney. Mr. Cheney, are you surprised?
I was surprised, Judy. I thought Admiral Inman was a good choice and then fully expected him to serve. I did not anticipate any confirmation problems, so I think I was as surprised as everybody else was.
So when he says that there were, and you're obviously, good friends, good professional colleagues, friends of yours who are members of the Republican contingent of the Senate, were you hearing that there was some sort of effort underway to derail this nomination by Republicans in the Senate?
No, I'm sure he would have been asked tough questions. I was asked tough questions when I was confirmed as secretary. That's par for the course, but I take all the senators at their word. They've all indicated that they had no intention to oppose him, and I think that's probably the case.
Senator Robb, what were you hearing? I mean, I gather you were surprised as well.
Judy, I was surprised. I would confess that since we've been out of session, since the withdrawal or the resignation of Secretary Aspen was announced, up until this time, there hasn't been the opportunity for the normal back-channeling and what have you that you might hear, but I was not aware of any specific dissent. There were concerns raised about the late payment of the Social Security, but other than that, I think most people thought it was a very strong choice. He was well known on the Hill and throughout most of the professional, both intelligence and defense community, and thought well of by just about everyone. He's one of the few people that I would truly consider brilliant in terms of his own intellectual skills and firepower. I was not aware of any difficulty pending in the nomination, whatever.
Well, that being the case, what do you make of this explanation today? Frankly, sort of a rambling explanation about the media, William Safire, Senator Dole. There were a number of explanations.
It was indeed unusual, certainly by Washington standards. I think, however, and I have known Admiral Inman for quite a number of years, I think that he is exactly what you see. He is largely a guileless man, a little naive perhaps in terms of dealing with the so-called spin that he indicated he wasn't real crazy about, and unwilling to put up with what he saw as a spin rather than the ability to just absolutely speak his mind. And that kind of candor, even from the most forthright officials, is not always evident.
Dick Cheney, did what he say ring true in terms of describing the climate in Washington, the new McCarthyism, columnist out to get him, and he, of course, cited William Safire in particular?
Well, I've known Bill Safire a long time. He writes tough columns. But that's sort of par for the course. I think there's no question but what sometimes it gets pretty rough in Washington, but Admiral Inman was an old pro. He'd been around 30 years. He knows the business and knows the city. And my own personal view is that he is one of the more respected experts in the defense and intelligence business. And that while everybody takes a few shots once in a while, that if you were to compare his press against that of a lot of people who've been around here for a long time, it was considerably better than many others receive.
Do either one of you know of any other reason that may be out there for this, other than what Admiral Inman offered today?
No, I don't know of anything, Judy. And my sense of it is that he was reluctant in the first place. President Clinton talked him into accepting it. The more he thought about it and considered what it would mean in terms of his personal and family life, he decided not to do it.
Judy, I agree with Dick in that. I think that he just didn't want to put up with what he thought he was going to have to put up with. He viewed it as a distraction. His family wasn't all that enamored of the prospect of coming back to Washington and being cast into what was essentially a political environment, which he had largely escaped even though living here previously. And he said to himself on June 6th or whatever date it was, hey, I don't need this. And he honestly came to that conclusion and acted in accordance with that belief.
Right, on January 6th, I think you meant to say. But what does it say about the president that he chose someone who was so reluctant, who had to be dragged, as we now see, practically kicking and screaming, taking into a job and then turning around 2 weeks later and changing his mind?
You got a major problem because the administration, in effect, doesn't have its national security team in place. And it's been a problem all year long, but we're a full year into the administration. We're now looking for our third Secretary of Defense nominee. New undersecretary coming in over the State Department. That the team hasn't meshed and melded yet, and the Defense Department isn't just another department. It is the biggest department of the federal government. Over the majority of the people who work for the federal government work in the Department of Defense. So it's a major post, and to have it in effect leaderless at a time like this is a serious problem.
Senator Rob, what does it say about the president that he chose someone who was so reluctant and who then turned around and changed his mind 2 or 3 weeks later?
Well, I think what the president wanted to do, given the special challenge that he faced in this area, and I think it was widely reported and indeed speculated about for some period of time that some new leadership was needed, he wanted to find someone that was respected by the defense community and understood Washington. And he thought, I'm certain, that given the high regard in which most people who'd worked with him held him, that this would be a good choice, and getting someone who did not yearn for it, but someone who was in effect talked out of the private sector where he'd spent 10 very prosperous and successful and enjoyable years, might be exactly what we needed at this particular time in our history. It obviously didn't work out, but I think the motivation was pure.
So you don't think it was a case of bad judgment on the president's part?
Well, he clearly had a reluctant candidate. The Rose Garden presentation when Bobby Inman went out and announced that he'd voted for George Bush.
And then he had to earn his own, that President Clinton had to earn his comfort with them.
There's a sense, and I can't, Chuck certainly knows the president better than I do, but I have the feeling lots of times that he believes so deeply in his ability to sell people and to convince and persuade that he thought he could bring him along, and obviously he wasn't able to.
Just quickly, names, the next name for Secretary of Defense. You heard Wolf Blitzer mention William Perry, who's the #2 at the Defense Department. He also mentioned James Woolsey, CIA. Are you hearing any other names?
Those two are obviously going to figure prominently. I think Norm Augustine's name will continue to be
Martin Marietta.
Martin Marietta, given his intense involvement in defense-related matters, both through the private sector as well as through his Augustine Commission and others. They'll probably continue to talk about folks that would need a waiver, specifically the most recent chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell or Bill Crow or others. But my guess is that the first three named would be my guess, would be where the inside Washington speculation will focus first.
Just quickly, I don't think they're going to ask you because we're a Republican Secretary of Defense.
I'm not sure I'd enhance anybody's prospects by mentioning them, Judy, so I'll pass.
All right. Dick Cheney, Senator Chuck Robb, we thank you both for being with us. Thank you. A parting shot from the Independent Council on Iran-Contra. Coming up next on Inside Politics, details on Lawrence Walsh's final report. What does it say about Ronald Reagan and about George Bush? Is it a question of justice, or, as critics charge, justifying the investigation?
Never thought I'd get fired up about a cold cereal, but this Quaker toasted oatmeal, I love it. It's got clusters of...
honey and oats and almonds.
And look, grains of oatmeal on every oatmeal flake.
Quaker toasted oatmeal, original and honey nut.
It's my other oatmeal.
It's just the morning and you don't need to caffeinate it for two.
Wake up to Folgers Coffee Singles, made with ground roast decaffeinated coffee for one freshly brewed cup.
The best part of waking up
is Singles in your cup.
Here we are on the road again, telling the world about the wonders of cable.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I ran into a little snowstorm. And this, folks, is to illustrate my point about the future.
Do you know what you can do with cable television in the future? You're going to be able to access information, shop at home, order any kind of movies. You're going to be able to play video games.
It's going to be a whole new world.
Cable is going to enable you to use television in a whole new way. And with that, I wish you all a fond adieu. Okay, fella, who's next? Let's go this way.
Someday, I'm going to use some of my money to do some good in this world. Someday, when the kids are...
Someday. It's a wonderful thought. But for children born into poverty, few of us can ever imagine someday won't be soon enough. Fortunately, there are many people in this world who didn't wait to help. Instead, they called the number on the screen to sponsor a child through Christian Children's Fund. Please write the number down while I introduce you to Chedutich.
Life is extremely difficult in the dry bush country where Chedutich lives. The family has a hut, some goats, but very little else. Yet thanks to the $21 a month his sponsor sends to CCF, Chedutich is able to attend school near his home. He also receives basic medical care and nutritious meals.
This young man's sponsor is not a wealthy person. She simply saw a need and responded.
Call now and we'll send a photo and story of a child whose life you can change for just $21 a month.
For two Republican presidents, the Iran-Contra affair was a dark and threatening cloud. It loomed over Ronald Reagan's second term, over George Bush's election, and over his final days in the White House. Today, after more than 6 years of investigation, the man who spearheaded the investigation into the whole affair, Independent Counsel Lawrence Walsh, released his final Iran-Contra report. CNN's Anthony Collins has details.
After a $37 million investigation, Independent Counsel Lawrence Walsh concludes there's no evidence President Reagan committed any crimes. But he says Mr. Reagan set the stage for other Iran-Contra figures to break the law in the name of helping American hostages and the Contras.
He thought he was serving the country in what he did. And the fact that he disregarded certain laws and statutes in the course of it was not because of any possibly self-centered purpose.
In his final report, Walsh said President Reagan and other high officials skirted the law, some of them broke the law, and almost all of them tried to cover up the president's willful activities. Walsh says Congress should have considered impeaching Mr. Reagan for the illegal arms sales to Iran and arms supplies to the Contras. Mr. Reagan's press secretary issued a statement saying, Mr. Walsh's report is little more than an expensive, self-administered pat on the back and a vehicle for baseless accusations that he could never have proven in court.
President Reagan did not do anything to suggest that people should or could or ought to violate the law.
Former Attorney General Edwin Meese denied Walsh's accusations of a wide-ranging cover-up.
Much of what he has to say in accusing the president, the vice president, other members of the cabinet, including myself, are just absolutely false.
Walsh said there was no evidence former President Bush broke any laws, but that Bush was wrong to say he was out of the loop on arms for hostages deals. Walsh also denounced Bush for pardoning 5 Iran-Contra figures.
I think President Bush will always have to answer for his pardons. I think that was the most unjustifiable act.
Walsh said the pardons helped create insurmountable obstacles for continuing his prosecutions. He said other problems were CIA refusal to release classified information needed in evidence, and the difficulty in prosecuting figures like Oliver North after Congress promised their testimony wouldn't be used against them. An appeals court threw out North's conviction for that reason. In his report, Walsh accuses North of ruthlessness, but North, a candidate for the U.S. Senate from Virginia, welcomed the report as bringing the affair to an end. He said, "There are no smoking guns when it comes to me." Walsh got a total of 11 convictions, but most were plea bargains. Only one minor figure served prison time. Walsh said it was important that high government officials know they can be prosecuted. He said he didn't achieve all the results he wanted, but to the extent that he was able, justice was done. Anthony Collins, CNN, Washington.
We'll have an interview with Lawrence Walsh at 6 o'clock Eastern on The World Today. That's all for this edition of Inside Politics. I'm Judy Woodruff. Thanks for watching.
Early Prime continues, followed by Showbiz Today after a word from your local cable system. Next on CNN.
725, 50, RB 750. Sold them.
Hello, I'm Mark Thomas. We're conducting an auction Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, January 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. We're selling assets on behalf of the RTC, banks, leasing companies, manufacturers, and others, including traditional desks, credenzas, conference tables, leather executive chairs and sofas, 486 computers, fax machines and copiers, residential furniture, including 18th century dining room and bedroom suites, grandfather clocks and curios, also jewelry and rugs, automobiles such as Mercedes and Jaguar. Call 682-0475 or see today's Chronicle.
When severe weather threatens, turn to the Weather Channel for all the latest weather conditions and safety information in your area. We'll keep you posted with the latest radar, watches and warnings, continuous updates, and safety tips. Remember, your best bet in severe weather is to stay informed. So when the weather takes a turn for the worse, turn to the Weather Channel.
Seen any good music lately? Cable brings you more concerts, more videos, more music than any other source. From rock...
Stories. And, you know, is this the way we govern the country? And if that was what I could anticipate, not personally related to me, but as a general climate toward government for the next 3 years, I decided I didn't want to be a part of it. I say again, I believe that Whitewater, issues like it, are very legitimate campaign issues. In 92, again in 96. But I don't see what they have to do with governing the country in 94, and I would tell you I believe that's the view held by the bulk of the population out across the country.
We'll be back in a moment with more on the Inman surprise. We'll talk to CNN.
This is Inside Politics with Judy Woodruff in Washington.
Thanks for joining us. Bernard Shaw is on assignment. Bob Inman was expected to be key to a retooling of President Clinton's national security team. But now Inman is the source of a surprise political glitch for the White House. The retired admiral stepped aside. White House correspondent Wolf Flitzer and others for reaction. We'll be back.
Inside Politics is brought to you by Paul Mitchell Salon Hair Care for fit, vibrant hair.
Hair that is free-flowing, like the sea, living in harmony with light, dancing in its shadows. Fit, vibrant hair, nourished and...
Today as the president's nominee to become Secretary of Defense. He said his problem was not with Mr. Clinton, but with the Senate's top Republican, with a prominent columnist, and among other things, with what Inman calls modern McCarthyism. But Inman's explanation raised more questions than it answered. And in a moment, we will turn to CNN's White House correspondent, Wolf Blitzer. But now, one major point Bob Inman made in withdrawing his name from consideration as Defense Secretary was his reluctance to endure personal and partisan attacks. And in an interview that I conducted earlier this afternoon with him, he reiterated his view that the current political climate in Washington was making it increasingly difficult for anyone to be a public servant.
All the allegations about whether or not there was likely to be partisan opposition was to really get me to focus on the climate of doing public service. And if I had been hungry for the job and I'd been desperate to want to to have the title, you ignore all of that. But as I indicated in my letter, I've already done 30 years of public service. I don't think I have to make any apologies about deciding that I don't want to do more of it, particularly in a climate that was heavily influenced by watching last week Whitewater develop